This is an interview with Penny George, and Penny describes her recovery from chronic fatigue syndrome and how that led her to go on to inspire others to take the steps in their recovery, and how she set up an organisation that can support them in that process. If you're interested.
Right, thanks for joining me, Penny. I know you and know a little bit about you, and I've heard your story, and I'm just looking really to ask you some questions about what you currently do now in the field of persistent pain and chronic fatigue, which you have a very particular interest in, and I'm fascinated to hear about that. We know the mechanisms between pain and fatigue very, very similar as a system kind of protection. But I'd like to start really with just asking you what you are currently offering to people who are in this field, perhaps as clinicians or patients who'd like to know a little bit more about this area.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to talk to people about it. I am running a small non-profit organisation called Living Proof, which I launched last September, so September 2022. Which is aiming basically to educate healthcare professionals and patients, or whatever we want to call them, members of the public who might be suffering with chronic conditions, about this pain science and about how they might be able to help themselves. So we're doing that in a number of different ways. We're still obviously quite new, but we've got various projects on the go and a relatively clear idea of the way, the way forward for Living Proof, or what we want to try and do at least. So we, at the moment, we have we've made 2 films, and I made those previously with Dan Hinesley, that you've interviewed previously, about his recovery story. So we made these 2 little short films, one of which tells the story, a recovery story from chronic pain, and the other tells the recovery story from chronic fatigue, just like you said. And they've been quite widely shared. They've got combined views of about 15,000 now, I think. Obviously, there's some double counting in there, but around 15,000. And people seem to be sharing those pretty widely because they're quite a nice little introduction to the whole concept of the kind of neuroplastic approach to treating chronic or persistent symptoms. So we've got those resources available. We've got we're running a series of what we call mind-body groups. So we've got in-person mind-body groups, which are like sort of peer-to-peer support network for people who have already experienced a recovery or largely recovered through using these techniques. And we've got one in Scotland and one in London that are running, and they meet every couple of months. And then we're just about to launch in June Mind Buddy Online, which is going to be a peer-to-peer support network or sort of platform for people who have developed an understanding of the science and of the neuroplastic approach, but who are still dealing with trying to resolve their symptoms. So we'll be kind of moderating a group of up to 12 people at a time to help them support each other online. So we're doing that. And then we also have a group of GPs who are currently working on developing a training course for GPs for clinicians more generally, but we think that GPs will be the group that might benefit from it the most, to help them start to understand this science, recognize it in their patients, and then be able to kind of signpost those patients to some resources that might actually be able to help them. So those are some of the things we're doing at the moment. So basically, in the big picture, we're trying to look at ways of developing helpful pathways, both for a patient who's experiencing chronic symptoms and hasn't seen any, help really through standard NHS channels, and for doctors and health clinicians, for them, a pathway for them to start to understand it and to be able to help those patients.
I think it's a brilliant project.
Thank you.
I've seen both of the films that you've produced, and I'll put the links in the text below this once we publish it on YouTube or wherever it goes. And could I just ask you a little bit what a mind buddy group looks like?
So the in-person well, the online ones we haven't started yet, so I can't answer that question because I've no idea what it'll look like. Everything's a bit of a test until we see how it works out. But the existing groups, in Scotland, we have, I think at the moment we've got 7 members, and they are all they happen to all be women, which is just coincidence. You know, we certainly haven't excluded men, but we haven't had any men come forward yet. And we are all people who have experienced a recovery from different conditions. You know, one person recovered from chronic pelvic pain, a couple of us from chronic fatigue syndrome, a couple from fibromyalgia, a couple from chronic back pain. You know, different conditions. And so far it's very much just been a social thing where we meet for lunch and we have the opportunity to spend time with other people who understand the science and who understand the experience of being able to recover through that, you know, this science. And I set them up really for selfish reasons initially, because I myself was feeling quite isolated in my own world, having gone through this experience, which for me has given me a whole different way of seeing the world. You know, it's not just resolved my symptoms, completely transformed the way I see the world. But my friends and family around me don't get it. They don't understand that. All they care is, well, Penny's better, you know. They don't think beyond that. And so I can't talk to them about it. And if I try, they just look at me blankly and, you know, change the subject generally. That sounds a bit nasty. I don't mean it in a nasty way, but, you know, they don't relate. So I was feeling isolated with that. And I thought, right, I would like to set up some kind of network so that I myself can have other people around me that do understand it. And then I thought, well, actually, if I'm feeling like that, then there's a high chance that other people might be in similar positions. So I think everybody's appreciating. So we've got that group in Scotland, and we're meeting kind of in different places across the central belt of Scotland, because many of the main cities are so close that we can, you know, jump around quite easily and make it easier for other people to join us. And then the London one, well, I haven't physically been at it. It's being hosted by Charlie, who's the young woman that features in the film about chronic pain. She's hosting the London group. And I think they've got 4 or 5 members so far. They're meeting again today, in fact, I think today or tomorrow. So yeah, so it's at the moment it's a social thing, but as I say, because Living Proof is still so new, I'm completely open to kind of responding to what people want. And if over time it turns out that people actually want more of a structure or a more professional format to things, then I'm very happy to go with the flow. And, you know, it's just kind of trial and error, seeing what people want, what people need, what supports people best. But that's what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, it's good. I was wondering about the format for what it looked like in the practicality of it. I might be interested in setting something up in the Northeast, and I'll come back to you with the, you know, maybe in the future about that.
Great.
But
yeah, that would be fantastic.
I've had a few patients that have done so well, and they've said to me, "Oh, if you ever want me to be an advocate for," they maybe don't want to talk on camera, or they might do a testimonial or anything like that, but they're quite happy to talk to another patient or someone who's experienced the same. Because a few people have said, one lady in particular said, "I feel like I'm on the other side of the matrix."
Yeah, in one of the first interviews I did after I recovered, I should say, I said, I feel like I'm on the other side of a huge secret. Yeah. So very similar to what your patient said.
Well, that leads quite nicely, really, onto where you are now to where you were. So would you mind explaining what it was like when you didn't have the secret?
So I suppose you're right. You know, before we started recording, you said something about how I think people's stories change over time a little bit, and I am realizing, you know, my story gets bigger as I look back over my life, you know, my earlier life, I suppose. And I've been saying to a few people in the last few days that I realize now that actually I was I only officially had chronic fatigue syndrome for just over 2 years, which in the big scheme of things is not much. You know, lots of people have it for very many years longer than that, in decades, as you know. So I was lucky in one sense to find this work fairly quickly and not have to suffer with it for too long. But looking back, I realize now that I was kind of always a sickly person, always, from my childhood, from tiny childhood. You know, as a small child, I had asthma, eczema, allergies. I was always sick. I was in and out of hospital a lot as a child, you know, got all sorts of quite severe infections and needed all sorts of operations and surgeries. And, you know, and then at school and all through my working career, I've always had a lot of sickness absences, or did have a lot of sickness absences and things. You know, and then 2017 is when I started to get seriously ill with the chronic fatigue, with what was later diagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome. And I was just getting sicker and sicker. I had infection after infection after infection, almost continuously, you know. And I now, of course, know that that was because my life was just imploding, you know, absolutely everything was going wrong during that period. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong. And then it all, you know, turned into what was diagnosed as chronic fatigue syndrome. So that was how my life was, just sort of really ill a lot. And now, I mean, I haven't seen a doctor for anything since the day I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I mean, I still, you know, I'll still get colds. I got COVID, you know, but none of these bugs or infections so far have affected me very seriously or for very long. I haven't had periods off work. Well, I have had periods of off work, but that's because of the pandemic rather than me being ill. Yeah, so just total transformation. You know, I feel like I live with vitality, you know. Having said that, everything's not perfect. And I was just thinking about this actually before we came on the call, but, you know, I have struggled with insomnia for a long time, about 25 years, and I'm still struggling with insomnia. So I haven't cracked everything, but I know that insomnia is just another part of the same thing. You know, it's all related to anxiety. It's all related to my system being stressed. It's all related to hypersensitivity and my brain wanting to protect me and being, you know, believing that it needs to keep me awake, to keep me safe. And I'm doing my best to train it that it really doesn't need to keep me awake to keep me safe. And it's better. It's a whole lot better than it was, but it's still not great. And especially when I'm away from home, you know, away from home, like I just can't.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting.
Which is understandable if you
Yeah, of course.
lens of safety, you know, for your brain.
Yeah, I heard something last week. I can't think where I've heard it, and I've mentioned it to a couple of people. I just can't put my finger on the reference point. And it said when we're asleep in a hotel, apparently half our brain doesn't sleep.
Yeah,
and that makes sense, doesn't it? Because the fire alarm's here, and we're going to do.
And well, just in unfamiliar surroundings, your brain is. I mean, you know, you can imagine. You know, our brains are still. I mean, you know this. You know, our brains are still. They haven't evolved at the rate that our society has evolved, and they're still in, you know, caveman brains. And if you've all moved to a new cave, you don't know what's out there. You don't know what tigers might be lurking outside that cave. So half of your brain needed to stay awake to watch out for those tigers. And that's exactly what's happening with our brain when we go to a different hotel, or, you know, even to a friend's house or something. You're not really sure of the noises that are happening out there. Does it mean somebody's coming, or, you know, so I completely understand that. Only my whole brain stays awake.
And when you describe that rational explanation of what's happening there, obviously you could have received rational explanations about chronic fatigue syndrome, like you explained to me now. How did you hear that message? And when was the tipping point, you think, there's something else here that's not what I'm being told?
Yeah, well, I think, so there's two ways of looking at it for me. One is that the very short version of my story, of my recovery story, is that I was one of these exceptionally lucky people who had what they call a book recovery. And I literally read one of Dr. Sarno's books, the last book that he wrote, which is called The Divided Mind, and I recovered overnight, which is ridiculous, and I still don't even believe it myself when I say it out loud. Oh,
Hey, good. Just anyone who's looking, that's what Penny read. I'll put the link to this up there as well.
Amazing, yeah, great book. Great book. Although you know, Sarno, a lot of Sarno's stuff was, well, all of Sarno's stuff was not scientifically based. It was all based on his own practice and his own trial and error. And although his book absolutely transformed my life, I do believe that now there are other books that are more scientifically based and you know, easier to follow as well. You know,
There's another one, Penny. There's another one. I don't know which one it's called, but there's one there.
Well, shamefully, I haven't read your book yet, Drew.
I don't need to.
I need to read it.
Yeah, you don't need to.
Oh, I read them all, though. I read them all. I just moved house, and when I packed up all my books that relate to this topic, 4 boxes worth of books. I love them. I'm completely obsessed with them. But anyway, to go back to your question. So the short version of my recovery story is that I recovered overnight. I was a book cure or a book recovery. However, again, if I look back at what happened before that, I realized that I was going through a kind of series of maybe like mini epiphanies, which allowed my mind to open a little bit more to what might actually be going on. And about 3 or 4 months before my book recovery, I had gone through an episode where I'd had a weird facial paralysis episode at work. I was at work. I'd managed some of the time during my illness. I did manage to go to work, and I was at work, had this weird episode during a meeting, had to leave work, come home, went to the A&E department close to my house, and was diagnosed there with something they call hemiplegic migraine, which can mimic the symptoms of a stroke. And I came home from that thinking, oh, for goodness sake, no, just no, you know, I'm not prepared to now have migraines on top of chronic fatigue syndrome. And I just, there was like this huge stop sign in my head saying, I just can't do anymore, you know. And then the doctor it was a student doctor who assessed me in that appointment, and he did this test on me where he got me to hold my hands out in front of me, and I was shaking really violently. I was feeling really ill and my hands were shaking. And he said, oh, the shaking's quite bad, that's terrible. And then he said, okay, close your eyes. And I closed my eyes, and he said, put your hands out again. And he said, that's interesting. Your hands aren't shaking when your eyes are closed. And I was really angry. I was really like, what's he suggesting? Is he suggesting I'm inventing my symptoms? And I got a bit, you know, upset. But when I came home that evening, I started thinking about that. And I thought, what is going on there? Is my brain making me shake? You know, did I want the doctor to see me shaking so that I'd get more attention? Or, you know, I was kind of thinking through all this stuff. And that was a big part of the processing for me, I think, was starting to think about whether my brain was actually playing a role in my symptoms. And then I started to think about, is it all related to anxiety? I was starting to recognize that I suffered from anxiety. I'd actually been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder as well at that point. And I was starting to think, I wonder if this, you know, it's the brain, anxiety happens in the brain or originates in the brain. Could all of the symptoms actually be related to the anxiety? So I was starting to go down that road with my thinking. And then I was introduced to the work of Dr. Sarno and that book he just showed me. And I think when I read the book, it all just clicked into place and boom, it all just lifted and went away, which is astonishing and potentially not that helpful for some people to hear. So I'm always a little bit wary about saying how quickly I recovered, because most people don't. And I think people need to understand that probably anyone listening to this, chances are most people will have to work a lot longer at it than I had to. I was very, very lucky.
I was just going to say that you will wind a lot of people up by saying,
I know,
you could, but I see it, and I don't see it. And so I explained to someone that, or anybody, that it doesn't matter how fast, because how fast it happens is simply a comparison with how fast it happens with somebody else. And if you're in comparison mode or fix-it mode, you're in the mode of thinking it's not going to change anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's amazing. And so you literally kind of read the book, processed the information, the symptoms lifted.
The next day, yeah, the next day. So what actually happened, to give you a little bit more detail, was I read the book on the Friday. Well, I read about half of it, I think, on the Friday evening, and in bed. And I went to sleep. And in the morning, I got up and I was getting ready to go and see if I was feeling good when I woke up. But because chronic fatigue syndrome is by its nature a very variable illness, so I had patches where I felt okay and patches where I felt terrible. So when I woke up on the Saturday morning, I just thought, oh, I'm having a good day. Great. I'll go and see a friend. So I was getting ready to go and see this friend, and the postman came and put a letter through my door. And when I opened the letter, it was from my employers at the time, telling me that I had been moved on to no pay because I'd hit the limit of my sickness, allowance. I'd been ill, off sick for months and months and months at a time. And there was no warning at all. I hadn't been told by HR that I was anywhere close to this limit. I didn't know this was coming. And it was the biggest shock. I opened that letter and my first reaction was utter panic, because I live alone. And I thought, I had visions of like instantly, I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose everything because I can't pay my mortgage, And then through the middle of that came this like sudden realization that actually this meant I was free, because I knew, the logic in my brain told me, well, you you have to work, you have to earn a living. You can't go back to that job because the job was part of what was making me ill. I was being really badly bullied at work at that time. And so suddenly it all clicked in my brain, boom, you have to leave that job and you have to go and get another job. So instantly there was this like, you're free. And when I had that realization, boom, it all just went, and that was it. I just felt it. I actually felt my physiology change in that moment. And just boom, I was like a different person, just like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty bizarre, and it probably sounds a bit ridiculous to some people.
No, I see it, and I see it with some talking techniques that you can use, not hypnosis, but kind of at an unconscious level. But that's where the change happens. And if it happens with a belief shift that's on an unconscious level, the change is pretty much like epiphany, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an epiphany. And
yeah.
I suppose it's like pinching yourself for a little while of how that's just happened, and then wanting to tell people that this is a real thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I went, I then had to go and see this friend. It was like literally in the next 10 minutes, I had to leave the house to be on time to see this friend. And I got to her house. I took the letter with me. And sorry, I'm just getting some water. And she opened the door expecting to see ill Penny. And she got this like, wah! Something intense has just happened to me. And I still think of her as my witness to my recovery. And normally in my ill state, I would have been able to spend like maybe an hour with a friend and then go home and be in bed for 3 days, recovering from that 1 hour talking. And in fact, this poor friend had me sitting in her kitchen talking at her for 6 hours because I was so excited about what had happened. She was kind of probably flat against the wall going, oh my God, when is Penny going to shut up? But yeah, it was pretty amazing.
Well, from telling that single story to her, for it to blossom into what this is potentially going to become, and who knows, in 5-10 years or whatever, you might have mind-buddy groups all over the country. And I know that you're networking and collaborating with other organisations, and you've just spent some time cycling across the northeast of England with the Flipping Pain campaign. How was that experience for someone who's not familiar with the Flipping campaign? Flipping Pain, can you tell them a little bit of that? It's not your organisation, but you know the ins and outs of it.
A little bit. So I've learned a bit more about how they operate, I think, now. So they are a public health campaign based in the northeast of England, funded in part by the NHS, which is a really good sign. You know, the NHS are starting to buy into the science, and they are they run a range of kind of events for healthcare professionals and members of the public to purely to educate about this science. They don't appear to have any pathway beyond the kind of raising awareness and things, but their campaign is great, you know, and they're completely on message. I suppose a difference between what Living Proof, the key messages that Living Proof are putting out and the key messages that Flip and Pain are putting out, is that because of my own experience and the people that I've met through my experience, as a result of my experience, we are very focused on recovery being possible, being an option. Whereas Flip and Pain are a little bit more cautious about that. It is one of their key messages that recovery is possible, but what I came to learn over the course of spending last week with them and participating in their events and things is that actually, for many members of society, the prospect of recovery is so far away from their current reality, you know, be that through their living circumstances, their educational level, their social circumstances, their family situation, you know, their whatever conditions they're suffering from, all of the complications that make up a human, that if you were to try and, you know, if I was to appear in front of some of these people saying, woohoo, you can recover, it's just so outside of what they can consider at the moment, that there is, I now understand, a need to just help those people maybe take baby steps towards an improvement in their condition and in their pain or whatever symptoms they have, helping them towards living a better life. And then, you know, what I would hope is that those people, once they start to take those steps and they maybe start to get an understanding of actually what power their brain has over the response their body is having, that gradually in the future, maybe the possibility of recovery might feature in their lives, and then they can come into the Living Proof side of things and aim for full recovery, you know. But I think Flip and Pain are doing, now I understand the value of the work that Flip and Pain are doing in parts of society that I don't necessarily have any reach into with my network.
It's a moderated excitement, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a moderated excitement. And really, if that there's messages it's for people at different points in their possibilities,
yes,
then it might reach out to areas that your success, if you called it that, and the people that you link with and collaborate with can advocate for and prove, they are living proof of that success.
Yeah.
Because that certainly has its place, where there was really, in the early part of my career, there wasn't, and I've been a physio 25 years, I never met anybody like you, Penny, you know. So, and for clinicians to see recovery, then it changes the wiring of their possibilities when they meet the next person.
Yeah.
And whenever they meet that person, they could be anywhere along that spectrum of recovery in belief systems that absolutely negate the possibility of any other option than what they see. And you're showing someone like that maybe a flying pig, and they'll look at it like it is a flying pig, and they'll say, but show me another flying pig.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and you have to appreciate that's what it looks like, even to somebody who isn't in persistent pain.
Yeah.
Clinicians to observe change in people, book club change, book reading change, a process that someone goes through change. It's still amazing, because we seem to have come to the conclusion at some point in the last 30 years, maybe 40 years, when chronic pain has become so prevalent that it's we've never had access to it, and yet we always have.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think there's you know, there's traditional societies all over the world that understand this better than we do, much better than we do, and societies that have never divided the mind from the body, they've always known that it's a linked system and it's a feedback loop that's continuously operating, every single second that we're alive. And it's like we lost it for a long time in our society, and we're only now understanding that actually it's the key to everything, really, I think.
Yeah. Well, I love the concept. I love the films you've already produced. I look forward to seeing them grow. I might get involved in something in the Northeast if you're happy to chat again sometime, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't know what that look like for me, but maybe a catalyst around here for something like that, because I think it's a great idea. And I'm very grateful for you giving me some of your time. I know people want to hear your story all over the place, but I'm very grateful for you telling it to me, and I'll share it with whoever wants to listen in the formats I have.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Drew. It's great to have the opportunity.